Get off my range. Cole Barrett snatched the rifle out of her hands. Not borrowed, not asked. Grabbed like it belonged to him, like she was holding something that offended him, simply by existing in her grip. He turned it over once, looked at it the way a man looks at garbage, and then dropped it on the ground at her feet. Right there, in front of everyone. The metal hit the dirt with a sound that cut through every conversation on that range. Take that thing home, he said, before you embarrass yourself. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And Emily Carter looked down at her rifle in the dirt and said absolutely nothing. That silence was about to cost him everything. Before we get into what happened next, and what happened next changed every single person standing on that range, go ahead and subscribe to this channel right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The morning of the American Precision Challenge started the way it always did, with dust heat and the particular kind of masculine energy that fills a space when elite soldiers believe they are among their equals. The range outside Tucson, Arizona stretched across a flat expanse of desert that went on so long in every direction that the horizon looked like something painted rather than real. The sun had barely cleared the ridgeline when the first shooters began arriving, and they arrived the way men like that always arrive, with purpose, with gear, with the confidence of people who have spent years being told they are exceptional. Army Rangers came in groups, laughing and talking in the shorthand language of men who have shared danger. Marine Raiders rolled in quietly, their eyes moving the way trained eyes always move, cataloging and calculating. Green Berets arrived with the particular ease of soldiers who have learned that the most dangerous men rarely need to advertise it. And the Navy SEALs arrived the way legends arrive. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell got there early. He always did. He set his rifle case down at his assigned position on the firing line, opened it with the care a man gives something he trusts with his life, and began the slow, methodical process of preparing his weapon. Ryan was 34 years old, lean in the way that comes from years of physical discipline, quiet and in the way that comes from years of watching people die and learning that most words are unnecessary. He had been on 17 combat deployments. He had made shots that existed in classified documents that only a handful of people in the country would ever read. I was not the kind of man who needed to tell you any of that. Major Cole Barrett was a different kind of man entirely. Cole arrived 20 minutes after Ryan, and he arrived loudly. He was 6'2", built like someone had designed him to look impressive, with the kind of jaw that photographers love, and the kind of smile that had probably gotten him out of 100 situations where he should have been in trouble. He was 38 years old and had spent most of those years becoming very good at two things: shooting and making sure everyone around him knew how good he was at shooting. His rifle was something to behold. A custom-built precision weapon with a stock that had been fitted specifically to his body, an optics package that cost more than most people's cars, and modifications that had been made by a gunsmith who worked exclusively with special operations units and charged accordingly. Cole carried it the way some men carry a trophy, not just as a tool, but as a statement. "Barrett," Ryan said when Cole approached, lifting his chin in the casual greeting of men who respect each other without necessarily liking each other. "Mitchell." Cole set his case down and looked out at the range. "You ready to watch me embarrass everyone here?" "I'm ready to watch you try," Ryan said. Cole laughed. He was always laughing. It was one of the things about him. The laughter never quite matched. The situation was always a little too present, a little too easy. Like a man who had learned early that confidence could be performed and never quite stopped performing it. The range filled up over the next 2 hours. Briefings were conducted. Safety protocols were reviewed. The morning's preliminary events moved through their paces, closer targets, more forgiving distances, the warm-up rounds that separated the merely good from the genuinely excellent. Emily Carter arrived somewhere in the middle of all of that. She drove a pickup truck that had seen better years. Not a wreck, but a working vehicle, the kind with mud in the wheel wells and a cracked side mirror held in place with electrical tape. She parked at the far end of the lot, away from the rows of expensive military vehicles and tactical trucks, and she got out carrying a rifle case that looked standard issue because it was standard issue. She was 27 years old, 5'6", brown hair pulled back, wearing a uniform that was clean and pressed, but had no decorations that drew the eye, no patches that made people stop and ask questions. She carried her rifle case in one hand and a water bottle in the other, and she walked to her assigned position on the firing line with the particular calm of someone who has absolutely nowhere else they'd rather be. Several people looked at her. Several looked away. One of Cole Barrett's teammates, a big man named Donovan, who had been in special operations long enough to have opinions about everything, nudged Cole with his elbow and nodded in Emily's direction. "You see what the Army sent us today?" Cole looked. He took in the truck, the standard rifle case, the plain uniform, the young woman who was now quietly setting up her position without making eye contact with anyone around her. And he laughed. That laugh, the one people remembered. "Who let her in here?" It started as a ripple and moved through the group of shooters nearest to Cole like something contagious. Not everyone laughed. Ryan Mitchell didn't, and a few of the older operators didn't. But enough people did that. The sound carried, and it carried in a direction. And that direction was unmistakably toward the young woman at the end of the firing line. Emily heard it. Of course she heard it. She did not look up. She opened her rifle case with the same unhurried movements she would have used if she were completely alone on the range, and she began the process of preparing her weapon. She ran her checks the way she had been trained to run them, methodically, quietly, with the kind of focus that comes not from concentration, but from something deeper, something that has gone past concentration into pure habit. Cole watched her for a moment, waiting for a reaction he recognized. Embarrassment, maybe? Or anger? Or the particular stiffness of someone trying very hard to pretend they didn't hear something they absolutely heard. He got none of those things. Emily Carter continued preparing her rifle as if Cole Barrett did not exist in the world. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Hey," he said, walking a few steps toward her. He said it the way men like Cole say things, not as a question, not as an invitation, but as a statement of his own presence. As if hey was enough of a word because it was coming from him. Emily looked up. She had brown eyes that were very still and very clear, the kind of eyes that have seen enough to have stopped being surprised by much of anything. "You actually planning to compete with that?" Cole nodded toward her rifle. "Or is this more of an observation trip?" "I'm planning to compete," Emily said. Her voice was level. Not cold would have implied effort. Just level. "With that rifle? With this rifle?" Cole looked at the weapon again. It was a good rifle, he knew that. Technically, he knew that, but it was not the rifle you brought to a competition like this one. Not if you were serious. Not if you cared about your results. It was standard military issue, competently maintained, without any of the modifications that the serious long-range shooters on this range had spent years and thousands of dollars accumulating. "What's your background?" he asked. "Army." "I can see that. Deployment." "Some. And they sent you here for—" "I signed up," Emily said simply. "Same as you." There was a pause. Cole searched for something else to say and found surprisingly that he didn't have it. "Well," he finally said, summoning his grin back into place. "Try not to embarrass the Army too much." He walked back to his position. Donovan was grinning at him. "She shut you down." "She didn't shut me down," Cole said. "She absolutely shut you down." Cole picked up his rifle and focused on his own preparations. But he kept glancing toward the end of the firing line. He couldn't quite explain why. Ryan Mitchell had watched the whole exchange from his position 2 spots down the line. He'd seen Cole walk over, watched Emily's response, watched Cole come back, looking slightly less certain of himself than he'd looked 20 seconds before. And something had moved in Ryan's chest, not quite recognition, because the rational part of his brain told him that was impossible. That was 6 years ago and 3,000 miles away, and this was a woman he had never seen before. But something. He turned back to his own rifle and told himself to focus. The first events of the day moved through with the efficiency of a well-run military exercise. The closer targets fell quickly, 200 meters, 500 meters, 700. The crowd that had gathered around the range's observation area grew as the morning went on, because word travels fast in military circles, and the word today was that the American Precision Challenge had a particularly strong field. Emily hit her early targets cleanly. Not dramatically, not in a way that drew gasps or applause. She simply hit them, one after another, with the kind of measured accuracy that speaks not to inspiration, but to deep structural competence. The sort of accuracy that comes from doing something 10,000 times until the movement is no longer something you think about, but something your body simply does. Cole hit his early targets the same way with the additional performance element that had always been part of his shooting. A slight pause before each shot that was just a fraction of a beat, too theatrical, a posture that was just slightly more composed than necessary, as if some part of him was always aware of being watched. By midday, the preliminary rounds had narrowed the field. The announcement came over the PA system with the flat authority of a military loudspeaker. The final event would be conducted at 1400 hours. The long horizon, 7 targets, distances beginning at 800 meters and escalating to 2,000. Changing wind conditions, extreme heat that created thermal distortion in the air between the shooter and the farthest targets. 1 attempt per target, no second chances. A murmur moved through the remaining shooters when the rules were confirmed. Cole Barrett absorbed them with his characteristic ease, but even he went slightly still when the range officer confirmed the final target distance, 2,000 meters, 2 kilometers. On a day with wind that had been changing direction every 40 minutes and heat that was cooking the air above the desert floor into something liquid and unreliable. "That's not a shot," Donovan said quietly. "That's a prayer." "It's a shot," Cole said. "Everything is a shot. Some shots are just harder than others. You hit that thing and I will personally buy you dinner for a year." Cole smiled. "Start budgeting." The announcement had reached Emily the same way it reached everyone else, through the loudspeaker all at once, without any particular ceremony. She heard the distance, and she felt a particular internal calibration that she had felt on 100 ranges and a handful of situations that were not ranges at all, where the stakes were not competition points, but human lives. She thought about her rifle. She knew her rifle the way you know something you have spent years learning to trust. She knew its particular character, its tendencies, the way it behaved in heat versus cold, the adjustments she needed to make for wind conditions at each distance point. She knew it in her hands and in her memory and in the muscle of her right shoulder where it settled when she took her position. She also knew with the specific, unsentimental clarity that comes from genuine competence that 2,000 meters was at the outer boundary of what this rifle could reliably do in these conditions. Not impossible. But the margin was thin. The margin was very thin. She made no dramatic statements about this. She told no one. She simply filed it in the part of her mind where she stored information that would need to be accounted for, and she went back to her preparations. The afternoon began to build toward 1400 hours the way storms build slowly at first, then all at once. The observation area was full. Officers who had been occupied with other duties found reasons to be near the firing line. Range staff moved with the particular energy of people who have been doing a job long enough to know when something significant is about to happen. And in the middle of all of that energy, Emily Carter sat quietly at her position, drinking water, watching the wind flags at various distances, building a picture in her mind of what the air between her and those distant targets was doing. Cole Barrett was nearby, running through his own mental preparation, though his version of preparation included a running commentary with Donovan and 2 other SEALs about the other shooters, about the conditions, about what the long horizon required, and why he was well suited to provide it. At some point, Cole looked toward Emily again. She was watching the wind flags with the total absorption of someone reading a letter from home. Something in that absorption, that complete unperformed focus, made Cole pause. "She's actually serious," he said quietly enough that only Donovan heard. "Seems serious to me since she got here," Donovan said. Cole said nothing to that. Ryan Mitchell, 2 positions down, was also watching Emily, and the feeling in his chest had not gone away. It had grown, actually, in the quiet way that certain feelings grow when you stop trying to dismiss them. He was a man who trusted his instincts. His instincts had kept him alive across 17 deployments and more close contact situations than he cared to enumerate. His instincts were telling him something about the woman at the end of the firing line, and he was trying to figure out whether to listen. 6 years. He kept coming back to 6 years. 6 years ago, on a mountain he was not supposed to be on, in a country whose name appeared in no official documents related to his presence there. Ryan Mitchell and his team had been in a situation that he thought about every single time he considered what it meant to owe someone your life. They had gone in for an extraction. The intelligence had been wrong. The intelligence was always wrong in the ways that mattered most and right in the ways that were too late to be useful. What was supposed to be a controlled extraction had become a situation, and a situation had become a sustained firefight that lasted through the night and into the early morning. And there had been a moment somewhere in the last hour before dawn where Ryan had genuinely calculated the odds and found them unacceptable. And then a voice had come over the radio, a woman's voice, calm the way, still water is calm, not passive, but steady with a steadiness that comes from depth. Stay where you are, I have you covered. He had never seen her face. He had never learned her name. The mission was classified at a level that made asking questions inadvisable. And by the time the team had been extracted alive, all of them alive against odds that Ryan still couldn't fully explain, the shooter on that mountain had simply not been there anymore. No briefing, no introduction, no acknowledgement that she had existed at all. Just the fact of their survival and the knowledge that someone had made that survival possible. Ryan looked at Emily Carter's profile as she watched the wind flags. The shape of that stillness, the particular quality of that focus. He told himself he was being irrational. He went back to his own preparation and told himself to stop. The clock moved toward 1400 hours. The long horizon waited, and somewhere over the desert the wind changed direction again. The final event began with Cole Barrett at the line. Of course it did. Cole had structured his morning in the unspoken but unmistakable way of a man who intends to go first, because going first means setting the standard that everyone else has to meet. He had arrived at the shooting position with his custom rifle and his custom confidence, and the crowd had arranged itself in the observation area with the unconscious body language of people who expect to see something worth seeing. He did not disappoint them. Not at first. The first target at 800 meters fell to his shot without drama, the distant steel plate ringing with a sound that carried back to the firing line, a split second after the muzzle report. He worked through the targets, methodically adjusting for each new distance with the professional calm of a man who has done this in conditions far more stressful than a competition. 900 meters, hit. 1100 meters, hit. 1400 meters, hit. The crowd's appreciation grew with each distance, not in the wild way of sports crowds, but in the particular respectful way of people who understand what they are watching. Military audiences know what long-range accuracy requires. They do not applaud frivolously. 1600 meters, hit. 1800 meters, the second to last target, which would have ended most shooters' afternoons with complete satisfaction, hit. Cole worked the bolt, settled his breathing, and looked toward the final target. 2000 meters, the steel plate out there was small. At that distance, in full magnification through the best optics money could buy, it was still small. The heat shimmer between the firing line and the target made it seem to breathe, to shift, to refuse to fully resolve into a stable image. The wind flags at the intermediate distances were showing 3 different directions simultaneously, which meant the bullet would need to navigate conditions that were genuinely inconsistent, not variable in a predictable way, but actually contradictory. One section of air pushing one direction, while the next section pushed another, with thermal updrafts from the desert floor complicating both. Cole made his adjustments. I took his time. Nobody rushed him. The range was silent in the specific way it gets when everyone present understands that something difficult is happening. He fired. The report rolled across the range. 3 seconds of silence. No ring. The crowd absorbed this without drama. A miss at 2,000 meters in these conditions was not a failure. It was a data point. Cole worked the bolt, adjusted, fired again. 3 seconds, no ring. Something changed in Cole Barrett's posture. Not dramatically, he was too trained for that, but Ryan Mitchell, watching from the side, saw it. A fractional shift in the set of Cole's shoulders. The kind of movement that happens when a man begins negotiating with the possibility that he might not get the outcome he has built his morning around. Cole fired a 3rd time, no ring. He stood up from his position slowly. He turned to the range officer and nodded the signal that he was done with this target, that he was choosing to move on rather than continue spending attempts on a shot that wasn't coming together. Conditions today, Cole said to nobody in particular, loud enough to be heard. His voice was controlled, reasonable, the voice of a man offering an explanation rather than an excuse. Wind's doing 3 different things at once out there. That's not a shooter problem, that's a physics problem. Several people nodded. He wasn't wrong, but he was also finished. The range officer checked his clipboard. Emily Carter. The observation area shifted. People who had been watching Cole now turned toward the far end of the firing line where the quiet young woman in the plain uniform had been sitting for the better part of an hour, watching and waiting and doing nothing that drew any attention to herself. Emily stood up. She moved to the shooting position with the same unhurried quality that had characterized everything she'd done since she arrived. She placed her rifle settled into her position and began looking through her scope. Some people in the observation area looked confused. Not dismissive, Cole's performance had moved them past easy dismissal, but genuinely uncertain. They had watched a decorated Navy SEAL with a custom rifle fail to make this shot 3 times. The woman now approaching it had a standard issue rifle and no apparent recognition from anyone present. "Who is she?" someone said. "Army instructor," someone else replied. Instructor where nobody seemed to know. Emily worked through the first targets with the same methodical accuracy she had shown all day: 700 meters, 900, 1100, 1400, 1600, 1800. Each target fell to a single shot. She did not rush, but she did not linger either. She moved with the efficiency of someone who is not performing, but simply working. The crowd grew very quiet somewhere around 1600 meters. By 1800, the quiet had become something else. Something more like attention, the specific charged attention that a room gives to something it has suddenly realized it might have underestimated. Emily looked up from her scope after hitting the 1800-meter target. She checked the wind flags. She looked at the sky. She looked at the timer. And for the first time that afternoon, she felt the particular sensation that every shooter knows, the sensation of the math not quite working, of the variables stacking up in ways that push the probability of success below a threshold she was comfortable with. Her rifle was good. It was a rifle she trusted with her life, had trusted with her life in conditions that made this desert range look like a practice session. But the combination of the distance, the wind behavior, and the thermal distortion had created a set of conditions where the margin between success and failure had become very, very narrow. She was still looking at the wind flags when she heard footsteps. She didn't look up immediately. She was in the middle of a calculation, and she had learned a long time ago that calculations don't wait for social convenience. The footsteps stopped beside her. She looked up. Ryan Mitchell was standing there with his rifle in his hands. He was looking at her the way people look at something they have been trying to remember for a long time. "Try mine," he said. The range went so quiet that Emily could hear the wind moving across the desert. Cole Barrett, 3 positions away, turned at the sound of Ryan's voice and stared. Donovan stared. The range officer stared. Everyone in the observation area went absolutely still. A Navy SEAL, one of the best shooters on the range, a man who had been in competition himself, was offering his rifle to the Army instructor who had arrived in the beat-up pickup truck. Nobody understood it. Nobody in that moment knew the full weight of what Ryan was doing, or the reason behind it, or what that rifle represented in his hands versus what he was proposing to put it in. All they knew was that a man who had every reason to keep his weapon in his advantage was instead holding it out to someone else. Emily looked at the rifle. She looked at Ryan, and she saw in his face something she hadn't expected to see. Recognition. He knew. How he knew, what combination of observation and instinct and the 6-year-long weight of a debt he'd never been able to repay had led him to this moment, she couldn't have said precisely. But the knowledge was there in his eyes, clear and unmistakable, and it met something in Emily's chest that she had spent 6 years not examining too closely. She had done what she did on that mountain because it was what the situation required. She had stayed anonymous because anonymity was part of the job, because bringing attention to herself would have complicated things, because she genuinely did not need the recognition in any way that mattered to her. But being seen, actually seen by someone who had reason to see, was something she hadn't prepared for. "You were on that mountain," Ryan said quietly. It wasn't a question. Emily held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. Ryan exhaled a long, slow breath that seemed to carry something old and heavy out of him. "I knew," he said. "I told myself I didn't know, but I knew." He held the rifle out again. "Please," he said, "try mine." Emily looked at the rifle for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it. A weapon she had never held before. A weapon built to different specifications than hers, with different tolerances and different characteristics requiring adjustments. she would need to make in real time with the timer running and the wind shifting in 2,000 meters of hot Arizona air between the muzzle and a steel plate that was already difficult enough to see. She settled into position. She familiarized herself with the trigger pull in a single slow test movement that stopped just before the break point. She looked through the scope. The target resolved in her vision. Small, distant, shimmering in the heat, surrounded by wind that was doing three different things in three different sections of the air. The timer showed 40 seconds. Emily breathed. She processed the wind flags one more time. Not frantically, not desperately, but with the total calm of a person who has sat in a much smaller space with much higher stakes and found stillness there because stillness was the only option that worked. She made her adjustments. She breathed out halfway. She let everything else go. 30 seconds. 20. 10. She fired. The report of Ryan's rifle was slightly different from hers. A different sound, a different pressure wave against her face, the particular signature of a weapon built to different specifications than the one her hands knew. The bullet left the muzzle, at 2,000 meters at the velocity and angle, and with the wind compensation she had calculated the travel time was approximately 3 seconds. The range was absolutely silent. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And then across the desert, so far away, that it took the sound another moment to travel back to the firing line, the ring of steel, clear and unmistakable and absolutely final. The target at 2,000 meters had been hit by Emily Carter with a rifle she had never held before on her first attempt. The silence lasted one more heartbeat after the sound reached them. Then the observation area came apart. Not in the polished, restrained way of military audiences watching a good performance, but in the raw, disbelieving way of people who have just witnessed something they cannot immediately file into any category they already have. Cole Barrett stood very still. It was a man who had built his professional identity on being exceptional. He had spent 20 years making sure that when people talked about shooters, his name came up first. He had never quite considered what it would feel like to watch someone do what he could not do with equipment he would not have chosen on their first attempt with a weapon they had never handled. It felt, he discovered, like being corrected by the universe. And somewhere in the noise of the crowd and the echo of that distant ring, still fading across the desert, Major Cole Barrett had to decide what kind of man he was actually going to be. Ryan Mitchell stood where he had been standing when he offered his rifle one step to the side, hands empty, now watching Emily as the crowd around her began reacting to what she had done. His face held the particular expression of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally been able to set it down. 6 years. Every mission since, every time he'd looked at the blank space in the debrief documents where the anonymous shooter's name would have been if anyone had been willing to put a name there. Every time he tried to explain to people what happened on that mountain and found that the most important part, the part that made the story true, was missing. He knew it now, and he had done the only thing that seemed right when he realized. He had given her the best tool he had. Emily stood up from the firing position. She held Ryan's rifle out to him. He took it. For a moment, they simply looked at each other in the middle of all that noise, two people sharing a weight that the crowd around them couldn't fully see. "Thank you," Ryan said. Emily shook her head slightly. "We're even," she said. And Cole Barrett, standing 3 positions away with the crowd surging around him and the echo of that impossible shot, still moving through the desert air, heard those 2 words and began to understand that something had happened today that was much larger than a competition. He just didn't yet know how large. That part was still coming. Part 2, the weight of a name nobody knew. The ring of that steel plate was still echoing across the desert when the crowd stopped being a crowd and became something else entirely, a collection of individuals, each one privately recalculating everything they thought they understood about the last 4 hours. Ryan Mitchell stood exactly where he had been standing. He hadn't moved. His hands were at his sides, his rifle back in his grip, and his eyes were still on Emily Carter the way a man's eyes stay on something after he has finally confirmed what he spent years hoping was true. The noise around him, the shouting, the disbelief, the conversations breaking out in every direction moved around him like water moves around a rock. He was somewhere else, somewhere 6 years back and 3,000 miles away on a mountain that didn't officially exist in a situation that had never been written down anywhere that anyone would ever read. Cole Barrett hadn't moved either. That was the thing that Donovan noticed first. In 15 years of working alongside Cole Barrett, Donovan had never seen the man go still after a setback. Cole's response to difficulty was always forward motion, another plan, another angle, another version of confidence, reassembled faster than the last one had fallen apart. It was one of the things that made him exceptional in the field. He did not stay down. But right now, Cole was standing 3 positions away from the firing line, and he was absolutely still, and something in his face had changed in a way that Donovan didn't have a word for. Cole, Donovan said. Cole didn't respond. Hey, Donovan put a hand on his shoulder. You good? Cole turned and looked at him slowly like a man coming back from a considerable distance. She hit it, Cole said. Yeah. First shot. Yeah. With Ryan's rifle. With Ryan's rifle, Donovan confirmed. Rifle she'd never touched before. First shot, 2,000 meters. Cole looked back toward Emily, who was now surrounded by a circle of people that had formed the way. Crowds always form around something extraordinary, not deliberately but organically, as if gravity had shifted and everything nearby was being pulled toward one point. How, Cole said. And he wasn't asking Donovan. He was asking the air. He was asking the question a man asks when the world has demonstrated that something he believed was not quite as solid as he thought. Donovan had been in special operations long enough to recognize the specific kind of crisis Cole was having. It wasn't the miss at 2,000 meters in these conditions was defensible by any reasonable standard. It was the comparison. It was watching someone do what he could not do with less than what he had and having no category in which to put that information. You know what I think, Donovan said. I don't care what you think. I think you need to go talk to her. Cole looked at him. I'm serious, Donovan said. Not to apologize, not yet. Just go stand in her vicinity and try to understand what just happened. Because right now you're over here building a story about this in your head, and the story is wrong, and we both know it. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What makes you think the story is wrong? Because the story you're building, Donovan said, makes this about the rifle. And this was never about the rifle. That landed somewhere. Cole didn't show it the way most men would have shown it. No visible reaction, no acknowledgement. But something shifted behind his eyes, and Donovan knew that was enough. The range officer was moving through the crowd, now doing the administrative work that competition requires, recording results, confirming times, gathering scorecards. The preliminary chaos of the crowd was organizing itself back into something manageable. People were drifting back toward their own positions, their own equipment, their own conversations. But a smaller group had formed around Ryan and Emily that was not drifting anywhere. It included several senior operators men with enough rank and experience that their attention carried weight. They had gathered not with the noise of the larger crowd, but with the specific focused quiet of people who are trying to understand something that matters. One of them was Master Sergeant Gerald Webb, a 42-year-old Army Ranger who had more combat experience than almost anyone else on the range and almost no patience for anything that wasn't exactly what it appeared to be. He had watched Emily's entire sequence from the observation area, and what he had seen had produced in him a feeling he didn't often have, the feeling of being genuinely surprised. Carter, Webb said, stepping into the circle. He used her last name the way senior NCOs use last names, not as distance, but as respect. Emily turned toward him. 20 years I've been coming to events like this, Webb said. I've seen some shooting. He paused. That was something else. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me. I'm stating a fact. He looked at Ryan. And you. He pointed a finger. You want to tell me what that was? Ryan met his gaze calmly. I offered her a better tool for the job. In the middle of your own competition. Yes. Why? There was a pause. Ryan looked at Emily briefly, a glance that lasted less than a second, but carried a full conversation in it. Because she earned it, Ryan said, a long time ago. Webb looked between them. He was a man who had spent 20 years reading situations, reading rooms, reading people. Reading the space between what was said and what was meant. Something was here, something significant, but it was clearly not his to pull out into the open. And he respected that boundary the way experienced operators respected all boundaries that are not theirs to cross. All right, Webb said. He looked at Emily one more time. All right, he stepped back. The circle adjusted. Cole Barrett arrived at the edge of it. He didn't push through. That was the first thing Cole Barrett, who had moved through rooms and situations and social spaces his entire career. with the absolute confidence of a man who assumed his presence was wanted, stopped at the edge of the circle and waited. People noticed. Several heads turned. Emily noticed too. She looked at him across the space between them, and her expression didn't change, not because she was performing neutrality, but because she genuinely didn't know yet which version of Cole Barrett had arrived at the edge of that circle. The one from this morning or a different one. Cole took a step forward. "Carter," he said. "Major." Another step. "That was the best shooting I have ever seen in person," he said, "and I've seen a lot of shooting." The crowd around them absorbed this. Nobody reacted dramatically. These were military people, and military people don't perform reactions for an audience. But the quality of the silence changed in a way that everyone registered. Emily studied him for a moment. "Is that what you came to say?" she asked. "No," Cole said. "That's the easy part." He stopped in front of her, up close without the distance and the performing. In the audience he'd been working all morning, he looked different. Older maybe, or just more real. "The harder part is that I treated you like you didn't belong here this morning. And I was wrong. And I knew I was wrong before you took that shot. I just hadn't finished deciding what to do about it yet." Something moved across Emily's face. Not forgiveness, it was too early for forgiveness, and she was too honest for a performance of it. But recognition. The recognition of a person who has heard enough insincere apologies to identify the real article. "Most people decide they were wrong," she said, "after the evidence makes it unavoidable." "I know. That's not the same as actually growing." "I know that too," Cole said. He held her gaze. "I'm not standing here expecting anything. I'm standing here because Donovan told me to come over here and understand what happened, and the more I think about it, the more I think he was right." "So, what did happen?" Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You spent this whole morning looking at what I was carrying. You never once looked at what I was doing." Cole received that. I didn't argue with it. He didn't deflect or explain. He just stood there and let it land where it was aimed. "You're right," he said. "I know," Emily said. There was a pause that was not uncomfortable. It was the pause of two people who have covered the necessary ground and don't need to fill the remaining space with noise. Then Emily said, quieter, "For what it's worth, you can shoot. The first 6 targets, the way you worked through those distances, that was real skill. What happened at 2,000 meters, that was the conditions. Nobody needs to tell you different." Cole's jaw tightened slightly, not with anger, with the particular tension of a man receiving something he knows he doesn't entirely deserve. "You're being generous," he said. "I'm being accurate," Emily said. "Those are different things." Donovan, watching from slightly outside the circle, felt something he rarely felt watching Cole Barrett interact with the world: genuine respect. Not for Cole in this moment. For whoever this woman was that had just handled Cole Barrett with more precision than any shot she had fired today. Ryan Mitchell had stepped back slightly during the exchange between Cole and Emily, giving them the space the conversation required. He was watching, but not with the watchfulness of someone cataloging information, with the watchfulness of someone who has been holding a particular kind of tension for 6 years and has finally in the last 20 minutes been able to release it. He was thinking about the mountain. I was thinking about his team. 12 men, all of whom had gone home to their families and their lives and their futures because of something that had happened on that mountain that none of them could fully explain, and none of them had ever been able to properly credit. He was thinking about the blank spaces in the debrief. I was thinking about what it meant that he was standing here now on this range in Arizona, and the woman whose name had been a blank space in his memory for 6 years was standing 20 feet away, explaining to Cole Barrett the difference between generosity and accuracy. He needed to talk to her, not about the shot, not about today, about the mountain, about the things that had never been said because there had been no one to say them to, but not here, not in the middle of all this. He would wait. The crowd was thinning as the formal portions of the day wrapped up. Range officers moved through with clipboards, collecting scorecards, confirming final standings. The overhead speaker crackled twice and then announced that the awards ceremony would take place at 1700 hours in the main briefing building and that all competitors were requested to attend. Emily was gathering her equipment when she became aware that someone was standing a few feet away waiting with a patience that was clearly practiced. She looked up. The man standing there wore the rank of general. Not a competition official, she would have recognized that competition official. This was someone who had come to this range today, specifically who had been in the observation area during the longer horizon, and who was now looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. General Michael Dawson was 61 years old, and he had the face of a man who had spent those years making decisions that cost things, sometimes money, sometimes time, sometimes things that couldn't be replaced. He was not a man who showed up at events without reason. "Sergeant Carter," he said. Emily straightened slightly. "General." "At ease." He glanced toward her rifle case. "May I walk with you?" It wasn't a question, really, but it was phrased as one which told her something about the kind of general he was. "Of course, sir." They walked away from the remaining cluster of people around the firing line toward the equipment storage area at the side of the range, far enough for a private conversation. Not so far that it looked like something it wasn't. For the first 20 steps, Dawson didn't say anything. "Then how long have you been an instructor?" "3 years, sir." "Before that, field assignment." "Which field?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "The kind that doesn't have a formal name on the paperwork, sir." Dawson nodded slowly. He had expected that answer or something like it. "I was in the observation area today," he said, "for all of it, including this morning." He paused, "Including Major Barrett's remarks." Emily said nothing. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Are you planning to file a complaint?" "No, sir." "Why not?" "Because he already apologized." Dawson looked at her. "That quickly?" "Men like that either never apologize," Emily said, "or they apologize the minute they realize they were wrong. He's the second kind. He just needed the evidence to catch up with him." Dawson was quiet for a moment. "You're generous," he said. Emily thought of what she'd said to Cole 20 minutes ago and almost smiled. "I'm accurate," she said. "Sir." Dawson stopped walking. He turned toward her fully the way people turn when they're about to say the thing they actually came to say. "I know what you did 6 years ago," he said. "I know where you were and what the situation was and what the outcome would have been without your involvement." He held her gaze. "I also know that you asked to remain anonymous. That request was honored. It will continue to be honored." A pause. "But I want you to know that the people who make those decisions, the decisions about what gets written down and what stays blank, those people know. And what they think of what you did is not something you will find in any document." Emily looked at him. She had not expected this. She had not expected any of today in the specific way it had unfolded, but this most of all. "Thank you, sir," she said. And for the first time today, there was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, not sentiment exactly, but the particular quality of a person who has been seen in the right way by the right person and felt the weight of that. "Don't thank me," Dawson said. "I'm stating a fact." He turned and began walking back toward the main buildings. He stopped after 3 steps and looked back over his shoulder. 1700 hours, Sergeant. I expect you to be there." "Yes, sir." He walked away. Emily stood with her rifle case in the afternoon sun and the sound of the desert settling into its own silence after a long and extraordinary day. She thought about Ryan's voice saying you were on that mountain. She thought about the 6 years between that mountain and this range. She thought about all the places in between, the quiet assignments, the long training sessions before dawn, the work that was never acknowledged because acknowledgement wasn't the point, because the point was the work itself and what it produced, and whether the people who needed to be kept safe stayed safe. She had never needed the credit. She still didn't need it. But standing there in the fading Arizona afternoon with the ring of that steel plate still somewhere in her memory, Emily Carter allowed herself one private moment of something that wasn't quite pride. It was quieter than pride and more solid. It was the feeling of a person who knows exactly who they are. The awards ceremony at 1700 hours was held in a briefing room that smelled of industrial air conditioning and old coffee. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows, and the competitors filled them with the particular energy of people who have spent a physical and mentally demanding day and are now running on something between exhaustion and adrenaline. Cole Barrett sat in the second row with Donovan on one side and an empty chair on the other. Ryan Mitchell sat in the fourth row near the aisle. Emily took a seat near the back because that was where she always sat in rooms like this, close enough to see what she needed to see, far enough to have a clear path to the exit if something required one. Old habit, the kind that becomes permanent. General Dawson took the podium at exactly 1700 hours. He had the particular presence of a man who has given many speeches and no longer needs them to mean what they used to mean to him, who has moved past the performance of authority into the reality of it. Today, he said, you watched some of the finest shooting I have witnessed in 31 years of this work. The room was attentive. You also watched something else, he said, and I want to talk about that. Cole went very still in the second row. Donovan glanced at him. Most of us arrived here today with assumptions, Dawson said. That's not a criticism, it's human. We look at equipment, we look at rank, we look at experience markers, and we build a picture. We decide before the evidence is in what someone is capable of. He looked slowly across the room. Some of those assumptions were tested today, and some of them failed. Cole Barrett looked at the floor. What Chief Mitchell did at the long horizon was not despite how it looked, simply a generous gesture. Dawson's voice was even. It was the act of a man who understood something that the rest of us are still catching up to, that the best tool in any situation should be in the hands of the person best qualified to use it, regardless of rank unit or what rifle they arrived with. Ryan was looking at his hands. I'm going to tell you something now, Dawson said. That will not appear in any official record of today's events. Because the full record of what I am about to describe does not exist in any document that most of you will ever have clearance to read, he paused. 6 years ago, a special operations team was extracted from an untenable position under circumstances that should not have permitted a successful extraction. The reason they came home, all 12 of them, was an anonymous shooter who maintained their position on a mountain for 9 hours and refused to abandon her post until every member of that team was clear. The room changed, the particular quality of silence that fills a space when people receive information they were not prepared to receive. That shooter, Dawson said, chose to remain anonymous. That choice has been respected. But what she could not prevent, he looked on toward the back of the room, was being recognized by one of the men whose life she saved. On this range, today. Every head turned. Emily Carter was sitting in the last row in her plain uniform with her standard-issue rifle case on the floor beside her, and she was looking at General Dawson with the expression of a person who has just had the last door of her privacy opened without warning. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look overwhelmed. She looked, and this was the thing that Ryan Mitchell watching from the fourth row would remember for the rest of his life, she looked like herself, exactly and completely herself. Unaltered by the weight of being seen by a room full of the most experienced operators in the country. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Master Sergeant Webb stood up. He did not applaud, he simply stood. One by one, in the particular unhurried way of people who understand the significance of what they're doing, the others in the room rose to their feet. Cole Barrett stood, Donovan stood, Ryan Mitchell in the fourth row was already standing. And in the back row, Emily Carter sat still for one more moment, letting the moment be what it was, not rushing toward it or away from it, and then she stood too. Because that she had always known was what you did when the work was finally finished. You stood up, and you stayed. The room stayed standing for a long time. Nobody signaled when it was over. Nobody announced that the moment had passed. It simply ran its course the way real moments do not, with a clean ending, but with a gradual return to breath and movement and the ordinary sounds of people shifting their weight and clearing their throats and remembering that they existed in a physical body, in a physical room, and that life continued past the extraordinary back into the regular. General Dawson stepped back from the podium. I didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The man understood the way very few people in positions of authority ever truly understand that the most powerful thing you can do after saying something that matters is stop talking. Emily sat back down first, then the room followed. And then, because military people are ultimately practical people, the administrative business of the ceremony continued. Scores were announced. Certificates were distributed. Handshakes happened in the efficient, unremarkable way of institutions that have learned to process both the extraordinary and the ordinary without allowing either to completely derail the schedule. But the room felt different now, not in a way anyone could have articulated precisely. Not louder or quieter or warmer exactly. Just charged. The way air feels in the minutes after lightning when the storm has moved on, but the atmosphere hasn't quite forgotten what passed through it. Cole Barrett received his certificate and shook the range officer's hand and returned to his seat, and the whole time he was aware of Emily Carter at the back of the room with the particular acute awareness of a man who has spent the last 2 hours having his understanding of a situation fundamentally revised. It was an uncomfortable feeling. Cole Barrett was not accustomed to discomfort of this variety, the kind that comes not from external pressure, but from internal revision, from the slow and somewhat painful process of updating a picture of the world that you built with great confidence and held for a very long time. He sat down next to Donovan. "You doing okay?" Donovan asked quietly. "I've been better," Cole said. "Yeah." Donovan was quiet for a moment. "You've also been worse." Cole looked at him. "Afghanistan 2019, Donovan said. "You remember what you said to me after that mission?" "Don't." "You said, and I am quoting exactly, you said, the thing that kills you isn't always the thing you're looking at." Donovan let that sit for a second. "I thought you meant enemy combatants at the time, but I think maybe you knew something broader than that even then." Cole didn't respond, but he didn't dismiss it either. The ceremony wrapped up at 1800 hours with the precision of military timekeeping, and the room began to empty in the layered way of large gatherings, some people leaving immediately, some drifting toward conversations, some finding the refreshment table that had appeared along the back wall with the quiet efficiency of military logistics. Ryan Mitchell moved through the departing crowd toward the back of the room. Emily was still in her seat. She was looking at the certificate in her hands, not reading it, just looking at it, and there was something in her face that Ryan had learned to recognize in people who have spent years operating in isolation. The expression of someone who is genuinely uncertain how to receive public acknowledgement, because public acknowledgement was never part of the job as they understood it. He sat down in the chair beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emily said without looking up, "You could have told me you knew." "I know," Ryan said. "Before the shot, before all of this. I know." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands together. "I thought about it, and I decided if I was wrong, if you weren't the person I thought you were, then telling you what I suspected would have been a very strange thing to say to a stranger at a shooting competition. And if you were right, if I was right," Ryan said, "then I thought the best thing I could do was what I did, give you the tool, step back." He looked at her. "You never needed anything from me 6 years ago, except to be left alone to do your job. I figured the same principle probably applied." Emily looked up from the certificate. "That was very well reasoned for a split-second decision," she said. "It wasn't entirely split-second," Ryan admitted. "I've been watching you since you got here, the way you moved through the preliminary rounds, the way you watched the wind, the way you didn't react to Barrett this morning." He paused. "There are things you can fake and things you can't. The way you operate, that's not something you can fake. I knew somewhere around Target 4. Emily was quiet. "Why did you stay?" Ryan asked. The question carried more weight than its 4 words suggested. He wasn't asking about today. They both understood that. "On the mountain, yes." Emily looked at the front of the room where the last few people were collecting their things. "Because," she said slowly, "I could see what was happening, and I had the ability to affect it. That's all. That's the whole calculation." She turned toward him. "You had 12 men down there. The extraction window was closing. The alternative to staying was there was no alternative. There was just the job." 9 hours, Ryan said. "I know how long it was. We didn't know you were still up there for most of it. We assumed whoever had been covering us had been rotated out or extracted or—" He stopped. "When we finally got to the pickup point, and I looked back at that ridge, I kept thinking someone is still up there, and nobody would tell me who." "Nobody could tell you," Emily said. "The assignment structure didn't allow for it. I know that now. I didn't know it then." He paused. "I filed 3 separate requests to find out. All 3, they were denied." Emily looked at him. "You filed requests?" "Of course I filed requests." His voice had an edge to it now. Not anger, but the particular intensity of someone saying something that has been waiting a long time to be said. 12 men came home because of something that happened on that mountain. You don't just let that go without needing to understand it, without needing to at least know the name of the person you owe that to. "You don't owe me anything." "Emily." He said her name the way you say a word when you want someone to actually hear it, not just receive it. "I have 12 teammates who have families. Kids. People who exist because that night went the way it went instead of the other way. And for 6 years, I have not been able to give those men an answer when they asked me what happened up there. Who stayed? Who made the calls that kept us alive?" He leaned back. "You don't owe me anything, but you have to understand for us knowing mattered." Emily was silent for a long moment. Outside, the desert had moved into the particular blue of early evening, when the heat breaks and the temperature drops with a speed that still surprises people who aren't from there. The last of the ceremony's attendees had filtered out of the briefing room, leaving the two of them in the institutional quiet of folding chairs and overhead fluorescence. "I didn't know it was your team specifically," Emily finally said. "The briefing I was given used coordinates and a timeline. No names. I didn't know whose team it was until you said something today." Ryan absorbed that. "So you did all of that," he said, "for 12 people whose names you didn't know." "For 12 people who needed it done," Emily said. "The names were irrelevant to the job." Ryan Mitchell had been in special operations for 12 years. He had worked alongside exceptional people, people of extraordinary skill and courage and dedication. He thought he had a fairly complete picture of what operational excellence looked like and where its limits were. He revised that picture sitting in a folding chair in a briefing room in Arizona, listening to Emily Carter explained that the names of the men she spent 9 hours protecting were irrelevant to the decision to protect them. "I need to ask you something," he said. "All right. After the mountain, after you were extracted, what happened to you assignment-wise?" Something shifted in Emily's expression. Subtle, but Ryan caught it. "I was reassigned," she said. "To instruction?" "Yes, by choice." A pause that was a half-second too long. "It was presented as an opportunity," Emily said. Ryan looked at her steadily. "That's not what I asked." Emily met his gaze. And in that moment, the thing that had been sitting quietly underneath the surface of the afternoon, the thing that the certificate and the standing ovation and General Dawson's careful words had not quite addressed, came into the open between them. "No," Emily said. "It was not entirely by choice." Ryan was very still. "The mission," Emily said carefully, "created complications. The way it was structured, the way I was inserted, there were questions afterward about authorization levels, about whether certain decisions that were made in the field exceeded what had been sanctioned." She paused. "The outcome was good. The outcome was unambiguously good, but the process raised flags. And when process raises flags at certain classification levels, the resolution is usually quiet reassignment." "They punished you," Ryan said. "They managed the situation," Emily said. Her voice was even. "That's different." "Did operationally, yes." She looked at the certificate again. "I'm not angry about it. I want to be clear about that. I understood the structure I was operating in. I made decisions that were outside that structure because the situation required it, and there was no time to seek additional authorization. I knew what that might mean. I accepted bet." "You saved 12 lives and they moved you to instruction," Ryan said. The flatness in his voice was not controlled. It was the flatness that comes after controlled runs out. "I saved 12 lives and I was given a posting where I could spend 3 years making better shooters," Emily said. "In terms of actual outcomes, in terms of what I can produce from where I am, I'm not sure the math is as unfavorable as you're making it sound." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. "You actually believe that," he said, not as an accusation, as something closer to wonder. "I actually believe that," Emily said. He shook his head slowly. "You are," he said, "the most genuinely unbothered person I have ever met in my life." "I'm not unbothered," Emily said. "I'm just prioritized. The things that bother me are the things worth being bothered by." Cole Barrett appeared in the doorway of the briefing room. He stood there for a moment, taking in the scene Ryan and Emily in adjacent chairs in the emptying room, the particular quality of the conversation they were clearly in the middle of. He had the look of a man who is calculating whether to proceed or retreat, and who has recently made a private commitment to proceed in situations where the old version of himself would have retreated. He walked in. He pulled a chair from the nearest row, turned it around and sat on it backward with his arms across the back, the posture of someone who is trying to be present without being imposing, who is aware that he is entering a space that wasn't designed for him and is trying to take up as little of it as possible. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "Yes," Ryan said. "Then I'll be quick." Cole looked at Emily. "I made some calls this afternoon, after the ceremony, to people I know who have access to information I normally don't go looking for." He paused. "I want you to know that I know what happened after the mountain. I know what was done with your assignment." Emily looked at him very carefully. "And I want you to know," Cole said, "that what was done was wrong. Full stop. No qualifications." He held her gaze. "I also want to tell you that I'm aware that me saying that doesn't change anything. I'm not saying it because I think it changes something. I'm saying it because it's true and because you should hear it from someone who has the background to understand what it means. The room was very quiet. How did you get that information? Emily asked. I have friends in administrative positions who owe me significant favors, Cole said. I called them in the last 2 hours. In the last 2 hours, Cole confirmed. I'm motivated when I'm motivated. Emily studied him for another long moment. Why, she said. Because this morning I walked over to your position and said something I shouldn't have said in front of people who didn't need to hear it. And I did it because you had a standard rifle and I had a custom one. And I told myself that meant something. He shifted in the chair. This afternoon, I found out that you were doing the work you're doing because someone decided that your decisions in the field decisions that brought 12 people home needed to be managed rather than recognized. He paused. Those two things are connected. The way you were treated this morning by me and the way you were treated 6 years ago by the system, it comes from the same place. The assumption that the packaging is the person. He looked at the rifle case on the floor beside her. It's not. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Ryan said quietly to no one in particular, this is the most emotionally articulate I have ever heard Cole Barrett be in 15 years. Cole looked at him. I have depths, apparently. I hate that it took this long to access them, Cole said. That's on me. Emily set the certificate down on the chair beside her. All right, she said. Both men looked at her. All right, Cole said. I mean, all right, I hear you, both of you. She looked at Cole. The apology is accepted, genuinely. Not because the afternoon forced it out of you, because it wasn't the afternoon. It was you deciding to go looking for the information you needed to understand the full picture. That's a different thing. She looked at Ryan. And what you did at the firing line with the rifle, I know what that cost you in the context of the competition, and I know why you did it, she stopped. She was not, Ryan noticed, a person who finished sentences that led toward overt gratitude. The sentence ran up against something internal and stopped. You're welcome, Ryan said simply. She nodded. The three of them sat in the near-empty briefing room as the evening settled over the range outside, and the particular silence between them was the silence of people who have covered real ground together in a short amount of time and are resting at the end of it. It was Donovan who broke the silence, arriving in the doorway with 4 cups of coffee on a cardboard tray and the expression of a man who has been outside a room for the last 20 minutes, specifically to give the people inside it the space they needed. I wasn't sure how everyone took it, he said, stepping in and distributing the cups. So I got black for everyone, and there's sugar in my pocket if you need it. How long were you waiting out there? Cole asked. Long enough, Donovan said. He settled into a chair. Also long enough to run into General Dawson in the hallway, who told me to tell Sergeant Carter that there will be a formal review of her assignment history beginning next week. The room went very still. Emily turned toward Donovan slowly. He said what? Ryan said. Formal review of assignment history, Donovan repeated. He looked at Emily. He also said, and I'm quoting because I wrote it down because I knew it would matter. He said, tell her it should have happened 3 years ago. The delay is regrettable and will be addressed. He pulled out his phone and showed her the note. Word for word. Emily looked at the phone screen. She looked at it for a long time. Cole Barrett watched her face and saw for the first time since she had arrived at the range in her beat-up pickup truck with her standard-issue rifle, something that cracked slightly in the composure. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't looking carefully, but a line moved across her face from the chin to the jaw, a tensing and then a releasing that was the specific movement of a person receiving news they had stopped expecting. He doesn't have to do that, Emily said. I think he knows that, Donovan said. I think that's maybe the point. Ryan was looking at his coffee cup. He was thinking about 12 men in 9 hours and 3 filed requests and 6 years of blank spaces in documents that should have had a name in them. He was thinking about what it cost compounded over 6 years to carry a debt you have no way to pay. Emily, he said. She looked at him. I'm sorry it took this long, he said. For any of this to happen, I tried to find you. I want you to know that. I tried. I know you tried, she said. I was told about the requests. Ryan looked up sharply. You were told. Yes. And you didn't, he stopped. Started again. You knew I was looking, and you... The assignment structure, Emily said carefully, responding would have created complications. Complications, Ryan repeated. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you spent 6 years knowing someone was trying to find you to thank you, Ryan said, and you stayed hidden because the paperwork was difficult. The paperwork was classified, Emily said. Emily. Ryan. She met his eyes. I understood what I was asking you to carry. I did, and I am sorry for that, genuinely sorry in a way that I have thought about more than you might imagine. But the situation I was in didn't give me a clean option. There was no version where I could respond to the request without creating problems that would have been worse than the silence. She paused. So I stayed silent, and I hated staying silent. And I am very glad that today happened the way it happened. Ryan held her gaze. Then he picked up his coffee cup and took a long, slow drink and set it back down. Back down. Okay, he said, okay. I have 12 years of wanting to understand what happened on that mountain, he said. I'm not going to process all of it in one evening in a briefing room in Arizona. He looked at her. But I understand enough for now. And I think the review that Dawson is initiating is going to open up some things. And when those things open up, I'd like to have a real conversation. Not in a briefing room, somewhere where we have time. Emily considered this. That seems reasonable, she said. Cole Barrett, who had been quiet for the last several minutes, spoke up. Can I ask you something? He said to Emily. She looked at him. When you hit that shot today, the 2,000-meter shot with Ryan's rifle, he paused. Were you scared? The question surprised her. She could see that it surprised Ryan too, and Donovan, who had been quietly drinking his coffee and staying out of things. Emily thought about it honestly, the way she did everything without performance or decoration. Not scared, she said. There was a moment when I was calculating the wind, and I knew the margin was thin, where I felt the possibility of failure very clearly, and I let myself feel it. Because ignoring it would have been dishonest, and dishonesty at that moment would have cost me the shot. She looked at Cole. But fear and clarity are different things. What I felt was clarity. Cole was quiet. That's the thing, isn't it? He said finally. Not a question, a recognition. Thing. The difference between knowing you're good and being good, he said. I've spent 20 years knowing I'm good. Today I watched someone just be good, without the knowing part in front of it. He shook his head slightly. That's harder to build than I thought. Master Sergeant Webb appeared in the doorway. He looked at the four of them, 2 SEALs, an Army Ranger, and Emily Carter, sitting in a briefing room with cardboard coffee cups and the particular atmosphere of people who have just been through something real together. Sergeant Carter, he said. Emily looked up. I've been talking to some people, Webb said, about your instruction program, about what you've built with it over the last 3 years. He stepped into the room. I have 12 Rangers who are about to begin an advanced marksmanship block. I've been looking for a lead instructor. I want you to consider it. Emily blinked. It was Ryan noticed the first time all day she had blinked with surprise rather than calm. That's Sergeant Webb. That's a significant assignment. It's a significant block of instruction, Webb said. It deserves a significant instructor. He looked at her steadily. You've been teaching people how to shoot for 3 years. I'd like you to teach my Rangers how to think. He paused. There's a difference. You understand the difference. Most instructors don't. Emily looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the certificate on the chair beside her. She looked at Ryan, who was watching her with an expression that was quiet and warm and entirely without agenda. And she thought about 3 years of early mornings on ranges that were emptier than they should have been, teaching people techniques that she had learned in places she couldn't talk about, building something from a posting that was supposed to be a quiet conclusion and that she had quietly refused to allow to be a conclusion. She thought about the long horizon. She thought about the mountain. She thought about 12 men whose names she hadn't known and a 9-hour watch she had kept anyway because the job was the job and the names were irrelevant to whether the job needed doing. She thought about Ryan Mitchell handing her his rifle with 2 words and a step back. Try mine. 2 words that meant I see you. 2 words that meant you have earned this. 2 words that meant I know what you're capable of, even if nobody else here does yet. She looked up at Webb. When does the block start? She asked. Webb allowed himself something that was not quite a smile, a senior NCO's version of one controlled and brief and entirely genuine. 3 weeks, he said. I'll need the training plan by end of week, Emily said. And I want to add a section they haven't done it before. Wind reading. Full environmental assessment before every practical exercise. She paused. Most shooters learn to shoot at targets. I want them to learn to read the space between themselves and the target. That's where the shot actually happens. Webb looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, the deep, deliberate nod of a man who has just confirmed exactly what he came here hoping to confirm. End of week, he said. You'll have everything you need. He turned and walked out. The four of them sat in the silence that followed. Then Donovan said, I'm just going to point out that in the last 8 hours, this woman arrived in a truck with a cracked mirror, got laughed off the firing line, hit an impossible shot, with someone else's rifle, got her classified, service record, partially declassified by a 2-star general, received an apology from the most stubborn man in the United States Navy, and just landed a major instruction assignment. He looked at Emily. What do you do on a slow day? Emily looked at him. I work on my shot, she said. And for the first time all day, surrounded by people who had finally, in their different ways and at their different speeds, caught up to understanding who she was. Emily Carter smiled. 3 weeks move fast when you had work to do. Emily Carter had always understood that the best antidote to anything uncomfortable, recognition, exposure, the particular vulnerability of being seen by a room full of people when you had spent years being invisible, was to return immediately to the work. Not as escape, as recalibration. The work was honest in a way that everything else struggled to be. The work did not care about your history or your reputation or what happened at a competition in Arizona. The work only cared about whether you showed up and whether you were prepared and whether you had the discipline to do it again tomorrow at the same standard you did it today. She drove back to Fort Huachuca the morning after the competition with the windows down and the radio off, letting the desert air move through the cab of the truck and thinking about 12 Rangers in a training block and a section on wind reading that she had been building in her head for 3 years without ever having the platform to deliver it. She had the training plan from Webb by Thursday. She had her additions submitted by Friday noon. She had approval by Friday afternoon, which was faster than the institutional pace she had learned to expect. And she understood that the speed was not accidental. Dawson's review had begun. Webb knew it. The people who process paperwork knew it. And when a 2-star general initiates a formal review of an assignment history, the institutional machinery around that history begins quietly and without announcement to move differently. Emily noticed. She did not comment on it. She filed the approval and began building her curriculum. The first day of the training block was a Monday, and it was cold in the way that high desert mornings are cold, sharp, and clear. The kind of cold that makes everything feel more awake than it actually is. The 12 Rangers were assembled on the range at 0600 hours, and they were the kind of assembled that means they had been there since 0545 because Rangers do not arrive at the last minute for anything. Emily arrived at 0550. She had been there, in fact, since 0530, walking the range, checking the wind flags at different positions, making notes on a small pad she kept in her breast pocket. By the time the Rangers were assembled, she had already mapped the morning's air currents and identified 3 positions where the thermal behavior would be significantly different from what a shooter's initial instinct would predict. She stood in front of them without preamble. 12 men, average age 26, average experience 4 years of active service. Every one of them had been deployed at least once. Several had been deployed multiple times. They were good soldiers. Webb would not have assigned them to an advanced block if they weren't. And they had the particular physical alertness of people who have learned that the world can change very fast, and that being ready when it does is the only reasonable response. They looked at her with the carefully neutral expression that experienced soldiers use when they are withholding judgment. Not dismissive, not impressed, waiting. Emily had taught enough people to read that expression perfectly. My name is Sergeant Carter, she said. I am not going to tell you my background because it's classified and because it's irrelevant. What is relevant is this: by the end of this block, you will be able to make accurate shots in conditions that currently exceed your capabilities. Not because I'm going to give you better equipment, because I'm going to change the way you think. She paused. The rifle is the last part of the equation. Most people treat it like the first. That's the mistake we're going to fix. One of the Rangers, a broad-shouldered staff sergeant named Kowalski, who had the look of a man who had been the best shooter in every previous environment he'd operated in, raised his hand. Sergeant, what's the longest shot you've personally made in a field environment? It was the question she expected. It was always the question. New group, new block, first day, someone always needed to establish whether the instructor had standing. Emily looked at Kowalski. That information is classified, she said. Kowalski held her gaze. Understood. But can you give us a sense of what I can give you, Emily said. This. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of folded paper. She unfolded it and held it up. It was a photograph, slightly grainy, the kind that comes from a long-range camera at maximum zoom. The photograph showed a steel target at an unmarked range. There was a hole in the center of it, a single hole, and in the bottom corner of the photograph, barely legible, was a handwritten measurement. She held it up long enough for the front row to see the number. Kowalski's eyes moved to it. His expression didn't change outwardly, but something shifted behind it. Questions about my standing, Emily said. Nobody raised a hand. Good, she said, folding the photograph back into her pocket. Then let's talk about wind. The morning's first session covered environmental reading. Not in the abstract theoretical way that most marksmanship instruction presented it, but in the granular, specific, practical way that Emily had developed across years of operating in conditions where the theoretical and the actual diverged sharply, and the consequence of that divergence was measured in lives rather than scores. She moved through the group as she talked, stopping at different positions, making them look at the wind flags from different angles, asking them what they saw, and then showing them what she saw and pointing out without condescension the difference. Kowalski was good. She could see it immediately, not just technically, but perceptually. He watched things the way trained eyes watch things, cataloging and connecting, building a picture from components. He would be the hardest to teach, she recognized, not because he was resistant, but because he was already good enough that the gap between where he was and where she was taking him was large enough to feel uncomfortable. The best students always felt that discomfort. Kowalski, she said midway through the morning session. He straightened. You're reading the flag at the 200-meter mark and adjusting for the full distance based on that reading. Right? Yes, Sergeant. What's the flag at the 1,000-meter mark doing? A pause. I don't have a clear angle on it from this position. No, you don't, which means you're making a 2,000-meter calculation with half the data. She moved to stand beside him. The wind at 200 meters and the wind at 1,000 meters are not the same wind. The space between you and the target is not uniform. It has sections, it has layers. The bullet travels through all of them, and if you only read one, you've already introduced error before you pull the trigger. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. Then how do you read all of them simultaneously? You don't, Emily said. You sequence. You build a picture from multiple points, and you hold all of it in your head at the same time, not as separate data points, but as a single integrated understanding. That's what the section I've added to this block is about. She looked at the group. This is going to be the hardest thing most of you have ever done on a range. Not physically, mentally. Because the skill I'm describing requires you to hold complexity without resolving it prematurely. Most shooters, most very good shooters, have a habit of simplifying too early. They need a clear picture before they can act. What I'm going to teach you is how to act with an incomplete picture and still put the round where it needs to go. The morning session ended at 10:00 hours. The Rangers broke for water and a short rest, and Emily walked to the far end of the range to check a flag positioning she wanted to adjust for the afternoon session. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Ryan Mitchell, she answered. How's day one? He asked without preamble. Productive, she said. I have one who's going to be exceptional and 11 who are going to be very good. How can you tell after one morning? The way the exceptional ones listen, she said. It's different from the way good ones listen. Good ones are listening for confirmation of what they already think. Exceptional ones are listening for the thing that contradicts what they think. She paused. Kowalski, staff sergeant. He's going to be angry for the first week and a half because what I'm telling him requires him to unlearn some things, and he's good enough that unlearning feels like going backward. And then around day 10, he's going to hit something and it's going to click. And after that, I won't be able to teach him anything he can't teach himself. Ryan was quiet for a moment. That's exactly how you talk about shooting, he said. It's how shooting works, Emily said. How are you doing? Not the training block. You. The question landed differently than she expected. Not intrusively, Ryan didn't do intrusive, but directly with the specific weight of someone who is asking because they actually want to know and have decided that the politeness of not asking costs more than the directness of asking. I'm fine, she said, Emily. I'm processing what she said, which is different from fine but functionally similar. I'm doing what I do when I need to process I'm working. The work is good, the curriculum is solid, the Rangers are engaged. She paused. The review that Dawson initiated is moving faster than I expected. I know, Ryan said. I've been briefed. She went still. You've been briefed on my review. I submitted a formal statement, Ryan said, 3 days ago, detailing what I know about the mountain mission and the outcomes and the subsequent assignment decision. I thought you should know. Emily stood at the far end of the range with her phone pressed against her ear and the morning desert wind moving around her, and she felt something move through her that she didn't have a precise word for. Not anger, not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated than either the feeling of someone who has been operating alone for so long that the sight of an ally appearing in an unexpected place produces an almost physical response. You didn't tell me you were going to do that, she said. I didn't ask your permission, Ryan said, because I knew you'd tell me not to. Ryan. I know, he said. You had your reasons for staying quiet. I understand the reasons. I respected the reasons for 6 years. But the review is open now, and what I know is material to it. And staying quiet when I have material information that could affect the outcome, that's not something I'm willing to do. A pause. I know that's not what you would have chosen. No, Emily said. It's not. I know. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understand each other well enough to disagree without the disagreement becoming a problem. What did you say? Emily asked. In the statement. The truth, Ryan said. What happened on the mountain. What the team's status was when the communication came through. What the outcome was. What the alternative outcome would have been. He paused. And what I believe about the assignment decision that followed. That it was wrong. That it was institutional management of a situation that should have been handled differently, and that the person it was applied to deserved better. Emily looked at the wine flag at the far end of the range. It was moving steadily, consistently in one direction, the kind of clean, readable wind that didn't exist in combat conditions, that didn't exist on the mountain. That was a luxury she had learned not to expect. Thank you, she said. You don't have to. Ryan. She said his name the way he had said hers in the briefing room 3 weeks ago, as a word that meant, stop, I want to finish this. Thank you, I mean it. You didn't have to do that, and you did it, and I want you to know that I understand what it means. A pause. You're welcome, he said. How's Kowalski's trigger discipline? She almost laughed. Technically perfect, mentally premature. Classic. She could hear the smile in his voice. Fix the mind first. That's the job, she said. She hung up and stood at the far end of the range for another 30 seconds, looking at the wind flag and thinking about the statement Ryan had submitted in the review that was moving faster than institutional reviews normally moved, and what all of that might mean for the next 6 months of her life. Then she turned around and walked back toward the group of 12 Rangers who were waiting for her to teach them something they couldn't yet imagine knowing. That was the job. It always had been. By the end of week 1, Kowalski was frustrated in exactly the way Emily had predicted. He was doing everything technically correct and getting results that were good by any objective standard, and he was furious because good was not the same as excellent, and he could feel the distance between where he was and where Emily was pointing, and the distance felt larger the closer he got to it. He came to her after the day 8 session. The other Rangers had cleared out. The range was empty except for the 2 of them and the late afternoon heat that had settled over everything like a second sky. Sergeant Carter, he said, Kowalski, I need to understand something. All right. The sequencing you're teaching, the way you hold multiple wind readings simultaneously and integrate them into a single decision, I can do the pieces. I've been doing the pieces all week. But when I try to put them together in real time with the clock running, I lose the integration and revert to single point reading. He stopped. How do you stop that from happening? Emily looked at him. This was the moment, not the moment of maximum frustration that had been 2 days ago when Kowalski had put his rifle down after a session and walked 20 feet away and stood with his back to the range for 3 minutes before coming back. That was maximum frustration. This focused, specific technical question after he had clearly spent his own time trying to solve the problem. This was the turn. You're still treating the data points as separate, she said. You're collecting them and then trying to assemble them, and the assembly step is where you lose time and revert, she paused. Stop collecting. Start perceiving. Kowalski frowned. I don't know what that means. Yes, you do, Emily said. You've done it before. Not on a range, in the field. There's a moment in a fast-moving situation where you stop processing information sequentially and you start perceiving the whole picture at once, where your brain shifts from analysis to pattern recognition. She looked at him. You know that moment? Every operator knows that moment. Kowalski was very still. You're describing the moment before a decision in contact, he said. Yes. That's a different cognitive state. That's not something you can manufacture on a range. You can't manufacture it, Emily said, but you can practice the conditions that produce it. And the condition that produces it is you have to stop being afraid of getting it wrong. She held his gaze. Your reversion to single-point reading is a safety mechanism. When the complexity gets too high, your brain reaches for the simpler tool because the simpler tool feels more certain. And certainty feels like control. She paused. But certainty at 2,000 meters is an illusion. The wind is uncertain. The thermal distortion is uncertain. The target's precise position is uncertain. Everything is uncertain. The shot happens in the middle of all that uncertainty, and the only way to make it is to stop trying to eliminate the uncertainty and start making peace with it. Kowalski stared at her. Make peace with it, he repeated. Accept that you don't have complete information. Accept that you never will, and then make the best decision available with what you have. She paused. That's not a shooting principle. That's everything. Kowalski was quiet for a long time. Where did you learn this? He asked. Emily looked at him. Somewhere I can't tell you about, she said. He nodded. He had been in the army long enough to know what that meant. Does it work? He asked. What you're describing in the field, does it actually work? Emily thought about a mountain. She thought about 9 hours. She thought about 12 men whose names she hadn't known, and 12 sets of decisions made in complete uncertainty with incomplete information, in the particular clarity that came not from certainty, but from the complete absolute acceptance of uncertainty. Yes, she said, it works. The formal review findings came through on a Thursday morning in week 2. Emily was on the range when her phone buzzed with a message from an administrative contact at Dawson's office. She read it once. She put the phone away. She finished the morning session. She released the rangers for lunch. Then she sat down on a bench at the side of the range and read the message again. The review had found formally and on record that the assignment decision made following the classified mission 6 years ago had been incorrect. That the decisions made in the field had been within acceptable parameters given the time constraints and operational realities of the situation. That the outcome all 12 team members extracted alive represented extraordinary individual initiative and exceptional skill under pressure. That the reassignment to instruction, while not without some legitimate institutional basis, had been applied in a manner disproportionate to the actual circumstances. The recommended corrective action was a formal promotion review immediate. Emily read that last part 3 times. She sat with it the way she sat with everything without rushing, without performing a reaction, just letting it settle into its proper place in her understanding of the world. Then she called Ryan. I heard, he said before she could speak. Of course you heard. Dawson called me this morning. He wanted me to know before you were notified. Why? Because he thought you might need someone to talk to who already knew, Ryan said. And because he's a man who pays attention to people. Emily looked at the empty range. I don't know what to do with this, she said. It was perhaps the most unguarded thing she had said to anyone in years. The most honest account of her internal state offered without calculation or management. You don't have to do anything with it today, Ryan said. It's a formal finding. It's going to sit in your record permanently. The promotion review is going to happen, and it's going to go the way it should go. None of that requires you to do anything today except receive it. I'm not very good at receiving things, Emily said. I know, Ryan said. You're better at doing, but sometimes the right thing to do is to stop doing and just let something be true. She thought about that. You're surprisingly wise for someone who tried to turn a competition into a personality contest this morning on the drive over, she said. That was not a personality contest. That was friendly competition. You asked me 3 times who I thought would win the next challenge event. I was making conversation. You were fishing. A pause then with the particular tone of a man who has been caught exactly as described, maybe a little. For the second time in 3 weeks, Emily Carter smiled in a way that surprised her, sudden and real, and uncontrolled in the way of things that come from somewhere genuine rather than somewhere performed. Ryan Shamaran, she said, yeah, thank you for the statement, for Dawson, for whatever you did that made this move this fast. She paused. I know you didn't do it for gratitude, but I want you to know it anyway. I did it because it was right, Ryan said, and because I could, and because he stopped. Because what? A pause that lasted long enough to have weight. Because 12 men went home, he said, and none of them ever got to thank you. And I thought the least I could do was make sure the record reflected what actually happened, even if most of the record stays classified forever. The part that can be corrected should be corrected. Emily sat with that. The afternoon session starts in 40 minutes, she said. Go teach, Ryan said. That's where you need to be. She hung up. She put her phone in her pocket. She stood up from the bench and rolled her shoulders and looked at the range in front of her. The empty positions, the distant flags, the long open space between the firing line and the far targets where the wind moved in its complex, layered, unreliable way. The space between the shooter and the target. That was where the shot actually happened. Not at the muzzle, not at the target, in between, in the uncertain, unmappable, constantly shifting space where the bullet traveled and the wind did what it did. And all the variables that you couldn't control were doing their work, regardless of whether you were ready for them. She had spent her whole career in that space. She had learned to be at home in it. The Rangers came back from lunch at 12:58, 2 minutes early, because Rangers did not arrive at the last minute for anything, and they found Sergeant Carter already on the range with wind flags she had repositioned during the break, creating a new configuration that was significantly more complex than the morning setup. Kowalski looked at the new configuration. He looked at Emily. This is intentional, he said. Everything I do is intentional, Emily said. The flags are contradicting each other. Yes. At the intermediate distances, the 400 and the 800, they're showing different directions. Yes. That means the bullet is going to hit a crosswind and then a headwind and then whatever the thermal layer above the 1200-meter mark is doing, Emily said, and which you can't read from here because you can't see that far with the naked eye in this light, and the mirage is obscuring the flag at that distance. She looked at him. Welcome to Tuesday. Kowalski stared at the range for a moment. Then he looked at her. You've made this shot before, he said. I've made shots in conditions like this, Emily said. Yes. What's the key? The key, Emily said, turning to address the whole group, is that you stop trying to solve it and start trying to understand it. There's a difference. Solving implies a correct answer that you arrive at and then execute. Understanding implies a continuous dynamic relationship with information that is always changing. She looked down the range. The shot doesn't happen when you pull the trigger. The shot happens in the second before you pull the trigger, when you have read everything available to you and accepted everything you can't read and made peace with the gap between what you know and what you need to know. She turned back to them. That second is what we're training today. Hey, not the trigger, not the adjustment, the second. Nobody said anything. The range was very quiet. Then Kowalski reached for his rifle. And Emily Carter, standing on a military range in Arizona 3 weeks after an impossible shot in a formal review, in the first real conversation about a mountain she had spent 6 years not discussing with anyone, watched 12 Rangers begin the slow, difficult, entirely necessary process of learning to operate in uncertainty, and felt in the quiet way of a person who has found exactly the place they are supposed to be, that the work was exactly right. It had always been exactly right. The setting was different. The classification level was different. The stakes in the immediate sense were different. But the job, the real job, the one that lived underneath all the jobs, was always the same. See clearly. Decide honestly. Act without waiting for certainty that will never come. And trust that if you have done the work, truly done it in the dark and the cold, And the long early mornings when nobody was watching, the shot will go where it needs to go. Cole Barrett called that evening. Emily almost didn't answer, not because she didn't want to talk to him. Her feelings about Cole had moved over the last 3 weeks into something she didn't have a precise category for, somewhere between respect and the particular affection you develop for people who show you their worst side and then do something genuine about it. But because she was tired and the day had been full, and the conversation she'd had with Ryan at lunch was still settling, she answered anyway. "How's the block going?" Cole asked. "Strong," she said. "Why?" "I wanted to know," he said. "Also, I have a professional question, and I wasn't sure how to ask it, so I'm just going to ask it." "All right. I'm redesigning the marksmanship curriculum for my squadron," Cole said. "Entry-level assessment through advanced. I've been working on it for 6 months, and it's good. It's technically solid, but it's missing something. And I know what it's missing because I watched you teach for 40 minutes today before I left to catch my flight, and what it's missing is everything you were covering in that afternoon session." He paused. "I want to add a section on environmental reading. The way you teach it, not the way it's normally taught." Another pause. "I'd like your input." Emily leaned back in her chair. "You drove back to the range to watch the afternoon session," she said. "My flight didn't leave until 1600, Cole said. "I had time." "Cole." "Yes." "Your flight was at 1400, she said. "Donovan told me 3 weeks ago." A pause. "Donovan talks too much," Cole said. "Bum." "He does what Emily agreed. Are you going to tell me why you actually came back?" A longer pause. "Because what you're teaching those Rangers is the thing I've been trying to figure out how to teach for 20 years, Cole said. "And I thought if I watched you do it, I'd understand how to build it into my own curriculum." His voice had the particular directness of a man who has recently learned that directness is more efficient than performance. Also because I wanted to see Kowalski's face when he realized the flag configuration was intentionally contradictory. That was worth the extra 2 hours by itself. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Send me your curriculum draft." Cole went still on the other end of the line. She could feel it. "You'll look at it," he said. "I'll look at it," she said. "I'm not rewriting it. I'm not taking over your program. But I'll look at it and tell you where the gaps are and what I would do differently." She paused. "And then you'll decide what to do with that information, because it's your program." "I know it's my program," Cole said. "I just want it to be better than it currently is." "Then send it," Emily said. She heard him exhale. "Carter," he said. "Barrett. For what it's worth, and I know it's not worth as much as it would have been worth if I'd said it 8 hours earlier, on a different day 3 weeks ago, you are the best I've seen. And I've seen a lot." Emily looked at the ceiling of her quarters. She thought about the mountain. She thought about 9 hours and 12 men in the particular quality of a night that never officially happened. She thought about a steel plate 2 kilometers away in the Arizona heat and a rifle she had never held before, and 2 words spoken by a man who understood before anyone else on that range did what they actually meant. She thought about Kowalski's face this afternoon when the second clicked into place and he made the shot clean perfect, impossible by the standards he'd arrived with, and turned to look at her with the expression of a person who has just discovered a room in themselves they didn't know existed. That was the work. That was always the work. "Get some sleep, Barrett," she said. "Send the curriculum tomorrow. We'll go from there." She hung up. The room was quiet. Outside, the Arizona night was doing what Arizona nights do, dropping fast from the day's heat into a cold that had teeth. The kind of cold that reminds you the desert is not a single thing but a conversation between extremes, always moving between what it was and what it's becoming. Emily Carter sat in the quiet and let the day settle. Tomorrow there would be 12 Rangers on the range before first light, and Kowalski would come in with questions she hadn't anticipated, because that was what happened when someone cracked open and started learning at the rate their potential actually permitted. And there would be when she couldn't predict, and conditions she would have to read in real time, and decisions she would have to make with incomplete information, and the permanent, irreducible uncertainty of doing something that mattered in a world that did not offer certainty to anyone. Just like always, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The promotion board met on a Tuesday. Emily didn't sleep the night before. Not because she was anxious. Anxiety implied uncertainty about something you cared about losing. And Emily had spent enough years operating without recognition. That recognition, while she understood its value, was not something she had learned to need. She didn't sleep because her mind wouldn't stop working. turning the curriculum revisions for week 3 over and over, finding the places where the instruction could be sharper, more direct, less forgiving of the comfortable habits that kept shooters good without making them exceptional. She lay in the dark and thought about Kowalski. Han had broken through on day 10 exactly as she had predicted. The shot he made on the afternoon of day 10 was the kind of shot that instructors remember the way parents remember the first time a child walks, not because it was technically perfect, though it was, but because of what it represented. The crossing of a threshold. The moment when a capability that existed only in potential became something the person could actually use. He had looked up from the firing position and found her eyes across the range, and she had nodded once, not applause, not a performance of approval, just the quiet acknowledgement of one person who understands something to another person who has just understood it for the first time. He had nodded back. After that, the dynamic in the group shifted, not dramatically, not with any announcement, but in the organic way that groups shift when the person who was most resistant to the new thing becomes the person who understands it most deeply. The other Rangers watched Kowalski and recalibrated their own understanding of what was possible, and recalibration is contagious in ways that instruction alone never quite achieves. By the end of week 2, 3 of them were making shots that were outside the stated objectives of the training block. By the end of week 3, 7 of them were. Webb had come to the range on the final afternoon of the block. He hadn't announced he was coming. He simply appeared at the observation position midway through the session and stood there with his arms crossed and his face doing the controlled nothing that experienced NCOs do when they are watching something that is exceeding their expectations and they don't want to show it. He stayed for the full session. When it ended and the Rangers were breaking down their positions, he walked toward Emily. "The 7 I'm thinking of," he said. "Tell me their names." Emily told him. Webb listened without writing anything down. He didn't need to. Men like Webb had memories built for exactly this kind of cataloging. "And Kowalski," he said. "Kowalski is different," Emily said. "Different how?" "The 7 I named are going to be excellent shooters for the rest of their careers. They'll apply what they learned here, and it will compound over time, and the units they're in will be measurably better for it." She paused. "Kowalski is going to be an instructor. Not yet. He needs another 3 years in the field minimum. But eventually, and when he does, he's going to teach this the way it should be taught because he didn't just learn the technique. He understood the principle." Webb was quiet for a moment. "That's a strong statement," he said. "It's an accurate one," Emily said. Webb looked at her the way he had looked at her on the first day on the range, after the competition in the briefing room. The steady measuring look of a man who has been evaluating people for 2 decades and trusts his assessments. "The board meets Tuesday," he said. "I know," Emily said. "Dawson will be there." "I know that too." "You're not going to tell me you're nervous," Webb said. It wasn't a question. He had known her long enough to understand that particular absence. "I'm going to tell you," Emily said, "that whatever the board decides, I'm teaching a new group of 12 on Monday morning, and I'd like the session plan approved by Friday." Webb almost smiled. "Friday," he said, "you'll have it." The board met at 0800 on Tuesday. Emily was not present. Promotion boards were not occasions for the candidate's attendance, which suited her completely. She was on the range at 0530, walking the positions, checking the equipment, preparing for a session that would not happen until Monday, but that she was already building in her mind because the mind, given useful work, does not wait for the calendar to catch up. Ryan called at 0915. She answered on the first ring, which surprised her because she hadn't decided to answer quickly. Her hand had moved before the decision was fully formed, which told her something about how much she had been pretending not to care about the outcome. "It's done," Ryan said. She waited. "Unanimous," he said. "Emily, it was unanimous." The word landed in her chest with a weight she hadn't anticipated. Unanimous. Every member of the board, no dissent, no compromise, no split decision, that would have meant the finding was technically correct but practically contested. Unanimous. She sat down on the bench at the edge of the range. She hadn't planned to sit down. Her legs had simply made the decision for her. "Ryan," she said. "I know," he said. I told myself I didn't care how it came out." "I know you told yourself that." "I was mostly right." "The mostly is the part that matters," Ryan said. "It's okay to care about this. You're allowed to care about this." She looked at the range in front of her. Empty. The flags moving in the morning air with a consistent, readable quality, of conditions that hadn't complicated themselves yet, that were still in the simple state they occupied before the heat built and the thermals started and everything became more difficult and more interesting. What happens now, she said. Administratively, the paperwork processes through this week. The formal notification comes through official channels probably Thursday. The ceremony, if you want a ceremony, can be scheduled at your preference. He paused. Dawson suggested that if you want it quiet, he understands. And if you want it public, he'll be there in person. Emily thought about that. She thought about the briefing room 3 weeks ago and 30 people standing in the particular silence of recognition and how that had felt, both the weight of it and the rightness of it, the two things existing simultaneously in a way she hadn't known how to prepare for. I'll think about it, she said. Take your time, Ryan said. You have until Thursday before the official notification, so you have a day or two before the world catches up. How do you know the notification comes Thursday? A pause. I know people, Ryan said. You have entirely too many contacts in administrative positions. It's a skill, he said, like wind reading. She almost laughed. The almost was close enough. Ryan, she said. Yeah. Come to the range Monday. I'm starting a new block. A pause. You want me on your range? I want you in the observation position, she said. Not shooting, watching. She paused. You submitted a statement to a review board on my behalf. You handed me a rifle at a critical moment and stepped back without being asked. You have been consistently and without any apparent expectation of return a person who shows up. She stopped. I thought you might want to see what the showing up produces. The silence on the other end of the line had a quality she hadn't heard from Ryan before. Not his normal stillness, deeper than that. The stillness of someone who has been offered something they didn't know they were waiting to be offered. Monday, he said, 05:30. 05:45, she said. I like 30 minutes before the group arrives, not 45. Use the extra 15 to sleep. 05:45, he said. And she could hear in those 4 syllables something that was not quite humor and not quite emotion, but lived in the particular territory between the two, where the most real things tend to reside. Cole Barrett sent the curriculum draft on Wednesday. It arrived as a file attachment with a message that said, I know it needs work. Be honest. And then after a line break like an afterthought, that wasn't an afterthought at all, I told Donovan about the promotion. He says congratulations, and also that he knew before the board met, which is not true, but which I've learned not to argue with. Emily read the curriculum draft that evening. It was good. She had expected it to be good because Cole Barrett, whatever his considerable personal failings, was genuinely excellent at his work. And his work included understanding what elite shooters needed and building systems to produce it. The technical foundation was solid. The progression made sense. The assessment criteria were rigorous without being arbitrary. But he was right. It needed work. The section on environmental reading was present, but thin, the kind of coverage that checks the institutional box without actually building the capability. And there were 3 places in the intermediate curriculum where the instruction jumped from concept to application without the step in between that turned understanding into instinct. She marked them all. She wrote her notes in the margins with the same directness she used for everything. Not softened, not diplomatic, but not unkind either. The notes of someone who respects the work enough to be honest about where it falls short. We sent it back Thursday morning with a message that said pages 12, 19, and 31 need a complete rebuild. The environmental section needs to be expanded by a third. The rest is strong, the bones are right. Fix the 3 pages and expand the section, and then send it back, and I'll look at it again. Cole's response came 11 minutes later. Pages 12, 19, and 31 need a complete rebuild that's half the intermediate block. Emily wrote back, I know. Build it right. His response took longer this time. 4 minutes. Then, okay, 1 word. No argument, no negotiation, no performance of confidence. To cover the discomfort of being told that something he had worked on for 6 months needed significant revision. Just okay? Emily put her phone down and thought that Cole Barrett was in fact capable of being someone significantly better than the person who had stood on a firing line in Arizona and laughed at a woman's rifle. The capacity had always been there. It had just needed the right set of circumstances to force it to the surface. That was true of most people she had come to believe. The better version was usually already present. It just needed to be made necessary. The official notification arrived Thursday at 1400 hours. It came through official channels as Ryan had predicted, and it said what it needed to say in the formal, somewhat airless language of military administrative documents. And Emily read it twice and then filed it and went back to the session plan she was building for Monday. Kowalski knocked on her office door at 14:30. She looked up. I was in his duty uniform, hat in hand, standing in the doorway with the specific posture of a man who has something to say and is deciding how to say it. Come in, Kowalski. He stepped in. He did not sit down, she hadn't offered, and he understood the protocol. I heard about the promotion board, he said. Word travels fast. Yes, Sergeant, it does. He paused. I wanted to say on behalf of the group, congratulations. And also, he stopped. Also what? He looked at her with an expression that was rare on a face trained to neutrality, the open, unguarded look of someone saying something true without having figured out how to protect themselves while saying it. Whatever you're teaching next, he said. I want to be in the room. I know I'm not in the next block. I know I have a field rotation coming. But when I come back, whenever you're running instruction, I want to be in the room. He paused. I've been in a lot of classrooms. I've had a lot of instructors. What you did in the last 3 weeks, what you showed me I could do, I didn't know that was possible. And I want... He stopped again. Emily waited. I want to be someone who can do for other people what you did for me, he said. Eventually, when I'm ready. He held her gaze. You told me on day 10 that I was going to be an instructor. I want you to know I heard that, and I want you to know I'm going to spend the next 3 years in the field making sure that when it happens, I do it right. Emily looked at him for a long moment. You already know the most important thing, she said. What's that? The difference between good and exceptional, she said. Most instructors spend their whole careers not understanding that difference. You understand it now. You can't un-understand it. She paused. 3 years in the field. Come back knowing what conditions feel like from inside them, not just from the firing line. And then come find me. Kowalski straightened. Yes, Sergeant, he said. He turned to leave. Kowalski. He stopped. The shot on day 10, she said. The one that clicked. What were you thinking in the second before you fired? He considered it. Nothing, he said. For the first time all week, I was thinking nothing. I had all the information and I just let it be what it was. He paused. And then I fired. Emily nodded. That's the whole thing, she said. Everything else is just practice. He nodded once, put his hat on, and walked out. Emily sat in the quiet of her office for a moment. Then she went back to the session plan. Monday arrived the way Mondays arrive when you have been working toward them all week, with a particular combination of readiness and adrenaline that comes from preparation meeting reality. The new group of 12 assembled on the range at 0558. Emily was already walking positions. The flags were already mapped in her mind. Ryan Mitchell was in the observation position at 0543. She saw him when she turned from the far flag. He was standing with a cup of coffee in the easy-contained stillness that was simply how he existed in the world, not performing patience, just naturally at rest in whatever moment he occupied. He lifted the coffee cup slightly when she looked at him. Not a wave, just an acknowledgement. She nodded. She turned back to the range. At 0600 exactly. She stood in front of the new group of 12. Different faces, different experience levels, different strengths and different gaps and different versions of the competence-confidence combination that the military reliably produced and that Emily had spent 3 years learning to reshape into something more precise. She looked at them. She thought about the mountain. She thought about the long horizon. She thought about Kowalski's face on day 10 and Ryan's voice saying, try mine, and Cole Barrett standing at the edge of a circle he wasn't sure he was welcome in, and a promotion board that had come back unanimous, and 12 men whose names she still didn't know coming home to their families. Because one night on a mountain that didn't officially exist, she had done her job. She thought about all the work that had led here done in the dark, in the cold, and the long mornings when no one was watching and no one was applauding, and the only measure of it was whether she showed up and whether she was prepared and whether she had the discipline to do it again tomorrow. That was the whole thing. Everything else was practice. My name is Sergeant Carter, she said. We are going to spend the next 3 weeks changing the way you think, not the way you shoot the way you think, because the shot begins in your mind long before it reaches your finger. She looked down the range. Most of you arrived here believing that better equipment produces better results. Some of you arrived here believing that more experience produces better results. Both of those beliefs are partially true and fundamentally incomplete. She looked back at them. What produces results? What produces the kind of results that hold up when the conditions are wrong and the clock is running and everything you planned for has changed is discipline, mental discipline. The discipline to hold complexity without collapsing it. The discipline to act without certainty. The discipline to be exactly as good when nobody is watching as you are when everybody is. She paused. Nobody moved. That's what we're building, she said. Not a better shooter, a better mind behind the shooter. She looked at each face in turn. Questions. Nobody raised a hand. Good, she said. Let's begin. In the observation position, Ryan Mitchell drank his coffee and watched Emily Carter begin the work. The real work, the deep work, the work that had always been the point, and he felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for 6 years. Not relief exactly. Something more lasting than relief. The feeling of a debt that has finally been properly honored. Not repaid, some debts are too large to repay, and both of them understood that. But honored, acknowledged, given its full weight in the record where previously there had been only a blank space. 12 men had come home because of what Emily Carter did on a mountain one night, and for 6 years that fact had existed only in the private knowledge of the people who were there, and in the quiet ongoing presence of a woman who had returned to the work without asking for anything in return. Now the record reflected it. Now the room knew her name. Now 12 new rangers stood on a range in Arizona, and the woman who was about to make them significantly better than they arrived was also the woman who had proven on a competition range and on a mountain, and in 3 weeks of instruction that exceeded every objective parameter, that the packaging was never the person, that the rifle did not make the warrior, that the warrior, the real warrior, the kind built from discipline and humility and years of work done in the dark, made everything else. Cole Barrett was in his office at that same moment rebuilding pages 12, 19, and 31 of a curriculum that was going to be better for the revision. He knew it was going to be better. He had known it the moment Emily's notes came back, and the initial sting of correction gave way to the clearer, more durable feeling of someone being shown how to improve something they actually cared about improving. He was writing a section on environmental reading that he had been unable to write before, not because the knowledge wasn't there, but because he hadn't understood until 3 weeks ago that the knowledge needed to be taught from the inside out rather than the outside in. That you couldn't give someone wind reading the way you gave them a technique. You had to give them the understanding that made the technique possible. I was learning to do that. He was learning it from someone who had arrived at a competition in a beat-up truck with a standard issue rifle and been laughed off the firing line by a man who was now rebuilding his curriculum based on what she had shown him. The irony was not lost on him. He sat with it daily the way you sit with things that are both uncomfortable and necessary, and he let it do its work. Master Sergeant Webb received the after-action report from the first training block on Wednesday of that week. He read it in his office with the door closed because Webb read things he cared about. With the door closed, it was a habit from his early years as an NCO that had never left him the habit of giving important things the full attention they deserved without the interruption of a world that was always finding reasons to interrupt. The report was the best he had seen from any training block in his 11 years in this assignment. Not the best marksmanship block, the best block of any kind. He read the results section twice. 7 Rangers performing above the advanced threshold by the end of week 2, 12 performing above the intermediate threshold, which was the stated objective by day 6. Day 6, the stated objective was day 15. On a read Emily's qualitative assessment of the group, precise and sentimental, specific to each individual in ways that revealed a depth of observation that most instructors couldn't achieve with 3 times the contact time. He read her recommendations for the follow-on block. Then he picked up his phone and called General Dawson. Dawson answered on the second ring. "The Carter block results," Webb said. "I've seen them," Dawson said. "Then you know what I'm going to say." "I know what you're going to say," Dawson said. "And the answer is yes. We're expanding the program." Webb leaned back in his chair. "How large?" he said. "We're still determining scope," Dawson said. "But the model she's built, the curriculum structure, the environmental reading section, the principle-based approach versus the technique-based approach, We're going to replicate it, starting with 3 additional sites. A pause. She's going to need to train the trainers. She's going to tell you that takes time, Webb said. It does take time, Dawson said. We have time. We're not in a hurry. We're building something that needs to be built right. Webb nodded, though Dawson couldn't see it. Does she know yet? He asked. No, Dawson said. I'd like you to tell her. She trusts you. Webb considered this. She trusts the work, Webb said, which is different, but I'll tell her. He hung up. He sat in his office for a moment with the door still closed and the after-action report on the desk in front of him. And he thought about the first day he had watched Emily Carter compete at the American Precision Challenge and the specific quality of her stillness under pressure and the way she had answered his post-ceremony questions with a precision that told him exactly who he was dealing with. I thought about the moment she had agreed to take the assignment, not dramatically, not with visible emotion, but with the immediate practical question of when the block started and what she needed by Friday. That was who she was. The work first. Always the work first. And now the work was going to expand 3 sites more instructors, a replication model that would carry what she had built into programs she would never directly teach to soldiers, she would never meet in situations she would never know about. That was the real shot, not the 2,000-meter plate in the Arizona heat. This, the reach of what one person builds when they do the work right in the dark without waiting to be asked. Webb picked up his phone again. He called Emily's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, which meant she was in the middle of something and had paused it to take the call. He respected that. Webb, he said, I have something to tell you. He told her. He kept it direct the way she kept things direct, without preamble or theatrical buildup. 3 sites. Train the trainers. Expand the model. Timeline to be determined, but the decision was made. There was silence on her end when he finished. Not the paralyzed silence of someone overwhelmed. The working silence of someone thinking. I'm going to need at least 6 months before I put instructors in front of their own groups, she said. The material isn't the hard part. Building the teaching methodology, helping instructors understand how to teach this rather than just do it, that takes time. You can't rush it. I know, Webb said. Dawson said we're building something that needs to be built, right? He means it. Another pause. Who selects the instructors I'm training, she said. You do, Webb said, within reason. She was quiet for a moment. Kowalski, she said. Not yet. He has 3 years in the field minimum before I'll put him in an instructor role. But when he comes back, he's on the list. Noted, Webb said. And I want final approval on curriculum modifications at each site, she said. Not because I don't trust the instructors, because the principle is the thing that can't be diluted. The technique can flex. The principle has to hold. Agreed, Webb said. And I'll make it work, she said. No excitement, no performance of gratitude. Just the flat, certain statement of a person who has assessed a challenge and determined that it is within her capacity to meet it. Webb felt in that moment exactly what he had felt, watching her walk to the firing position at the long horizon 3 weeks ago. The particular sensation of being in the presence of someone who is exactly what they appear to be, all the way down without any gap between the surface and what lies beneath. Emily, and he said, and he used her first name deliberately, the way you use someone's first name when you want them to receive something personally rather than professionally. Yes, the work you've done, not just the training block, not just the competition, all of it, the 3 years of instruction while carrying something that should have been corrected. The mountain and what came after. He paused. I've been in this business a long time. I've watched a lot of people handle a lot of things. What you've done and how you've done it, that's the standard. Not just for shooters, for people. A pause that had weight. Thank you, Emily said. Don't thank me, Webb said. I'm stating a fact. He hung up. On the range, the new group of 12 was 40 minutes into their first session. A young ranger in the 3rd position was struggling with the concept. Emily had introduced the idea that reading a single flag at a single distance was not wine reading. It was wind sampling, and that real wind reading required a continuous, integrated understanding of the full space between shooter and target. Emily walked to him. She stood beside him and looked at the flags and said quietly, so only he could hear, what are the flags at 200, 600, and 1200 doing? He looked at each one in turn, moving his eyes down the range. Different things, he said. Yes, and the space between 600 and 1200, the space where you can't see a flag. He thought about it. I don't know what it's doing, he said. Not yet, Emily said. But you're going to learn to make your best honest assessment of what that invisible space is doing based on what the visible flags on either side of it tell you. Not a guess, an educated inference from available evidence. She paused. That's the skill. Not knowing, inferring well. He looked at her. How long does it take to learn that? He said. Emily thought about Kowalski on day 10. She thought about a mountain and 9 hours of decisions made in the dark and with incomplete information. She thought about 2,000 meters and a rifle she had never held, and 2 words from a man who understood before anyone else did what she was capable of. She thought about all the mornings before anyone was watching. It takes as long as it takes, she said, but it starts right now with this flag, with this moment, with you deciding that good enough isn't the same as right. She met his eyes. Are you ready? He straightened. Yes, Sergeant, he said, and then let's begin, she said. And that was where it started and where it always started. Not with applause or ceremony or the formal recognition of boards and reviews, but with one person standing beside another at the range in the early morning, pointing at what they couldn't yet see and saying, look, look again, look until you understand what you're actually looking at. That was the instruction. That was the whole instruction. And the people who received it and carried it and gave it to the next person in line, they were the real shot, the one that traveled farther than any rifle could reach. The one that kept moving long after the shooter had left the range. Emily Carter had made that shot. She had made it on a mountain in the dark with no one watching. And she had been making it every day since. That was who she was. That was who she had always been. And now finally the record said so